Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
Well, hello, my two favourite boys, both on the same Zoom. What can I say? Stu and Charlie, how are you doing?
Very good, thank you. Yourself?
Good, thank you.
Hello, Lorraine. I wasn't sure you were talking about me then. I didn't realise I was one of your favourites. My word, I'm very touched.
Yeah. Absolutely. So Charlie Davidson, we're delighted to welcome you to Conveyancing Matters. Thanks ever so much for coming on. And really, for the benefit of the probably very few people watching this who don't know who you are, Hound of Holborn himself. So tell us a tiny bit about yourself, and we've got to say, where did the Hound of Holborn hashtag come from?
Oh, it's not a terribly interesting story, as none of these things are, because it lacks a decent punchline.
All my jokes.
Yeah, well. So my name is Charlie Davidson. I'm an associate solicitor at Bishop and Sewell, specialising in property, landlord and tenant, commercial, basically anything to do with bricks and mortar. That's me. And obviously, I've been a fan of you guys since you started doing this. A few people know me from my social media handle, the Hound of Holborn. To be perfectly honest, a friend just coined it once. I was wearing these most lurid red braces for a bet once, and I said, "Oh, look, I'm the shrew of Russell Square," and he came up, "No, you're the Hound of Holborn," and it stuck. And I thought, well, that's quite funny, whatever. And I was mentioning it to my baby sister when we were walking around Kennington Park, where I live, with my niece. She's not really my baby sister, come to think of it now. And I mentioned this as a joke, and she looked at me very seriously and she said, "I like that, Charlie, because hounds are quite loyal, aren't they?" And I went, and I thought that's a bit of fun. I started sticking it on hash marks and LinkedIn, and it didn't really occur to me that people were paying attention until I was doing a bridging loan matter, and the landlord's lawyers, midway through the phone call, just to check some things, they suddenly went, "I know who you are. You're that hound person." And I had this sudden horror that I realized, oh God, people follow me on LinkedIn and read things. Oh God. And at that moment, I should have tried to monetize it or be a bit more professional, sell myself. And I realized, nah, it's much more fun to do the rubbish that I do. So that's it really. That's me. I'm just a jobbing conveyancer with a few humorous posts, really.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Charlie, because of course people do that to you now, Stu, don't they?
Well, yeah, not in the same kind of way, but from sort of running PCS, from doing Conveyancing Matters, we get people contact us quite regularly, don't we?
Yeah, and you're from Conveyancing Matters, Stu. So one of the things
you get it as well.
Yeah, but it's kind of different for me. Albeit, of course, Conveyancing Matters is all you, Stu. I forgot.
Do you know what, Charlie? What Lorraine's not saying, and she gets very jealous. Right, okay. If somebody says that I'm from Conveyancing Matters, Lorraine, God, no, I'll get Lorraine's back up. if she doesn't get a mention, there's trouble.
I think it's.
Will you make sure you get them to delete that?
It's because I'm a selfish only child, Charlie. That's the problem.
Oh no, Lorraine, that's not the reason. The reason is that people just don't like you.
There is that. To be fair, that's also from being a selfish only child, mate. To be honest, but there we go.
We're not in this job to make friends, Lorraine. We're not in this job to make friends.
It's just as well. And funnily enough, actually, the serious point about that is that, when Stu and I talked about first doing this, that was one of the things we talked about, because we thought we would sort of be talking to clients and this would be much broader than it is. But obviously setting up in the midst of a pandemic, it's become very much about conveyancers, by conveyancers, for conveyancers. But one of the really, and particularly for Stu, because he's on the front line much more so than me, is that we thought very hard, because you do put yourself out there and it's not a popularity contest. And we did realise that the minute you put your head above the parapet, you're there to be shot at. And of course, that's happened a bit, but not much. But have you ever had any sort of negative experiences on LinkedIn as a result of, or anywhere else for that matter? There are other social media channels, Charlie, from putting yourself out there.
Well, not really. I mean, there are a few things which I won't go into, though, because they're quite beyond anything else. They're very tedious. But I think one thing I did, though, Stu, you can probably sympathise with this, though. I was stuck on hold with a bank, Barclays Bank, I can say that, with Barclays Bank. And I think I was on hold with them for 2.5 hours. And obviously, I've got one of those phones where the clock is ticking and you can see how long you've been on the phone for. And I just took a thing of that and I posted up saying, new record, on hold with Barclays Bank for 2.5 hours, trying to get through to confirm mortgage funds, as I often do. And everything, and basically that sort of went viral. That got 100,000 views, that sort of thing. And everyone's mostly it was just people sort of swapping stories. And that's what I love when you talk shop a little bit, though, because I trained at a law firm where I was one of maybe 2 conveyancers. And then to go to my current firm, Bishop and Sewell, we've got 40 plus. It's wonderful to have people talking. You go, it's not just me. Yeah. But the one thing that sticks out to me is that someone, not via the direct messaging, they went, you have to dig through the profile. They found my work email and emailed me from their own personal account, no name, they just, whatever. And they said, oh, I'm not sure you should have done that. And they gave me a list of reasons. First one saying, well, clearly you've put your client's name there, a Mr. Les Davidson. Second of all, I think you've defamed the bank. And I think you've got to be careful because it might be against your panel membership. And I didn't know. And the first thing I learned ages ago was you don't argue with people on the internet. I've got no, don't respond. As Charlie Booker once said, arguing with people on the internet, it's like throwing your shoes at the sky. It means nothing. But in defense of that wonderful comment of his, I would say 2 things. First of all, it's not defamation because it's true. I was on hold with Barclays Bank for 2.5 hours. The photograph proves it. I wasn't saying they were horrible, wasn't saying they were being mean. I was simply saying I'm on hold for 2.5 hours. Isn't this interesting? Second point, I'm not acting for a man called Les Davidson. Does anyone think perhaps maybe on the phone with the little digital screen it's saying Charles Davidson and it just got into the bit where it just said Les Davidson? So he thought, and also another thing he said, oh, you've put their private number up. That's a breach of GDPR. I went, that's not Barclays Bank private number. I do not have a private number for Barclays Bank. My life would be much easier if I had Barclays Bank private number.
I promise you, if I had it, I'd have phoned it.
No, I said, yes, you're right. I've breached their confidentiality by broadcasting the number, which is on the UK Finance Handbook standard instructions on the website. So occasionally you get people try to trip you up and try and say, oh, I'm cleverer than you. I'm like, look, I'm not trying to show I'm the cleverest lawyer in the world. I mean, I am. I'm just not trying to show that. But it's just trying to say, look, it's a fun job. You've got to laugh sometimes. And I find it bewildering when people try and bring their very serious academic side to it. I'm like, this is the wrong arena for this. I don't know if you've ever had anything like that, Stu.
Constantly. Absolutely constantly. I'm exactly the same as you. It's not I think I'm not sure if we can really say this, but it's like the term that I always think is fun is it's like a willy swinging exercise.
Yes, the wonderful PGing of that phrase. Well done. Yes,
that's it. But yeah, no, I mean we had exactly the same problems with basically all the banks. And like you say, it's they probably had their own rationale, their own reasons why we had to hold for so long. Not too dissimilar to the situation we were in with the volumes we had to cope with. So it's not necessarily a negative, it's a statement of fact. But you were probably lucky 2.5 hours at one stage, Jesus.
It's just sort of, because I remember it wasn't exactly the same. I used to do something very similar. It's not their fault. They're human beings working in a call centre, not being paid that much, and it's a horrible job. There's no point being rude at them. If I ever had to make a complaint, I'd apologise very profusely and say, I'm really sorry, but I need you to escalate this. It's nothing personal, but I need this to be sorted, and it's beyond your remit. So no, there's no point being yelling and effing and blinding at people, because the wonderful thing about conveyancing as opposed to litigation is that at the end of the day, we're all aiming for the same thing. We want to sell, we want to buy, we want to do something. We're all aiming for the same thing. Same with banks. They want to lend the money. That's their job. They don't sit there thinking, well, we're going to offer your client the money, but then we're going to pull it back because, well, we're bored today and we want to make your life more difficult. So we're all in the same boat. We're all really struggling with the caseload. And we got through it all together. Just try and be a bit kinder to one another. And I think we came through we've managed to get through that now. But, yeah.
I mean, one of the things, because I really was slightly reluctant, Charlie, in a way to kind of mention the S word, the dreaded SDLT word. But one of the things, that interests me about you two is that, your firm profiles are quite different. But it occurred to me that actually the sort of, the pain of the SDLT holiday, as it was never for conveyancers, was probably a very similar experience, really, in a way. So, Stu, what would you say is has been the worst thing? And let's see if it's similar to Charlie's.
Oh, to sum it up in one, the worst thing about it.
Yeah.
To me, it just has to be the volume of work and the constraints that we had to work within, and whether that be the fact that it was meant to be March, extended with little notice. But I think you've got to put that. It's not. You can't sum it up as one thing. It's everything put into the pot. And I think us as an industry received a lot of grief, but people would never really be able to contemplate what we had to work with. And like Charlie's already alluded to with the banks, you know, we have hundreds, you know, for the month of June and September, thousands of completions going through. And on every single one, you've got to ring the bank to make sure we're going to receive our clients' money. And, you know, we had numerous cases where we were on hold for well in excess of 2.5 hours. So just even computing that on its own, that's just one tiny part, let alone local authorities having mass delays with searches being issued, you know, all that kind of thing very rarely gets the, you know, spoken about. But yeah, of course, the slow conveyancers, the form fillers, as we've discussed before, we're the ones that kind of get the grief and held to blame, aren't we?
And Charlie, what about you?
I think the problem was it was a lot of people having their expectations mismanaged by a few very gung-ho estate agents. I've got a few chaps I've worked with for years and they get it. They realise that getting the offer, the memorandum of sale, getting that thing done, that's the start. There's still a lot of work left to do because, you know, clients never come up to you and they say, oh, Charlie, I've agreed in principle to purchase the property. Would you please do the due diligence, check that, advise and act for the bank in the final purchase? No, they say, I've bought a property. Can you press the big red button that lets me get the keys, please? And the problem is they didn't realize the sheer amount of, you know, due diligence, the checking, everything else. And they'd be very happy to make a complaint and help themselves to our indemnity policy if anything goes wrong. And they would forget the stress they were putting under. I mean, because obviously we were all working from home remotely and all this other stuff going on. I had a lot of 3 a.m. finishes. And I think on the final day of the June, the first tranche of the stamp duty holiday, I just put my feet up on my desk and I ended up falling asleep because I was just knackered. And a friend of mine took a picture of it. And I thought, let's put it up. It pretty much sums up. It's just absolutely exhausting because what people don't realize, it's not just buying a property. Yes, things are more online, more digital, more whatever, more, I hate using this phrase, streamlined, but there's more steps now. We're expected to do more now. We have to do this, we have to do that, and it just makes the process longer and longer and longer. And it doesn't help when you've got people phoning, constantly chasing. I think basically it was sort of everything turned up to 11. It wasn't a single point. It was everything turned up to 11, and a complete disregard for the risk parameters of the average conveyancing transaction. I mean, like saying, oh, it's only a £250,000 house. You go, right. If you were buying, you know, a business for £250,000, would you rush it through? £250,000. I used to say that to people, saying, no, you're buying, oh, it's only 250. No, it's £250,000. Put it in perspective here. You're buying £250,000 and you want me to do it for tuppence halfpenny over the weekend.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not interested.
It's interesting, Charlie, because they're kind of themes that really have, you know, run throughout our chats, really, frankly, over, you know, for the whole time we've been doing this now. And that idea that, well, you know, conveyancing is just filling in a form. So come on, Charlie, tell us what's conveyancing then, mate.
It's reinsurance, which can be seen by the recent Dreambar case. We obviously translate. We are there for our clients, and I love them. They make or break this job for me. That's what get me up in the morning. If I didn't love my clients, I'd go be a professional support lawyer at one of the bigger companies. But no, I love my clients. But mostly, and as we can see from the famous Dreambar case, we are reinsurance. The best example ever was a story that was retold to me. It was a commercial matter, but it sums up quite nicely. A guy went to his lawyer and said, oh, hi, I've got this commercial lease. It's £10,000 a year. I've got another 5 years to run, but I want to break it. I can break it. I want to get out of it. Can you help me? The lawyer looked at it and went, okay, fine. £10,000 a year, 5,000. So basically £50,000 of rent you don't want to pay. Right. I'll do your break clause for you. My fee will be £8,000. £8,000. We're only doing one piece of paper. I don't understand. Why are you doing that? And he went, it's very straightforward. If I do this break notice correctly, you say £50,000. Yeah. If I do it incorrectly, what do you have to pay? Well, I have to pay the £50,000 rent. No, you don't. I have to pay the £50,000 rent because I've got it wrong. And then I have to go to the insurers and everything else. There is an element of everything we do, but there's the risk parameter. We reinsure. People could do, if it wasn't for the banks saying, no, you need a conveyancer. I'm sure there are people who try and do it themselves, the same way people try and do litigation on their own to save a few pennies. But our job there is to sort of streamline the matter, advise clients, and most importantly, prevent disputes. Our job is litigation backwards. is to make sure that we don't have an argument, we don't have a fight. Oh, there's a dispute over there, let's resolve that before you pay. So really, basically it's reinsurance, but really it's litigation backwards, I always say.
Charlie,
Yeah,
I think a similar kind of point when you said, oh, it's only, what I get told all the time, it's a simple transaction.
What's
That's
that
the
when it's
word
at home?
Yeah. Oh, it's only a simple transaction. There's only 4 of us in the chain. It's only unregistered. The title deed's missing, but it's a simple transaction.
Yeah.
That's what we
Oh,
get
my
told.
favourite. It's a standard lease. It's just a
It's a
standard
standard lease. It's a standard lease. Yep.
I have to say, Charlie, you saying that, and I've definitely ranted a bit about this on here before.
No,
But,
surely
I know,
not.
shock, horror. But your allusion to the fact that, you know, people think they can do conveyancing on their own. And it was only a few weeks ago, actually, and I was, you know, casting around Twitter. And to be fair, I'm on quite a nice little corner of Twitter. I kind of, you know, I silenced the bile and haven't got that many followers, really, in relative terms of whatever people that follow you on Twitter are called. And I nearly piled into this discussion, but remembering your let's not have an argument on social media thing. And there was a lawyer, a decent lawyer, won't tell you the discipline that he works in, because that might, you know, for fear of offending. But his whole thing was, oh, you know, conveyancing, all terrible, having a terrible time, you know, blah, 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 blah. And the next thing that went up was some guy posted from about 2010, some book by somebody that said, you know, do your own conveyancing. Then a load of other people, including lawyers, piled in and said, oh, yes, it's all very terrible. You know, we could all do our own conveyancing. And I wanted to do that very thing, Charlie. I wanted to pile in and say, yes, but we're insured. And it's not our fault, those of us that do the job and try as hard as we can, it's not our fault you perhaps chose a dud conveyancer, or you asked a mate to do it for tuppence and you're paying the price now. But that it's that very point. And Stu and I reckon, Stu, we must mention indemnity insurance probably every other chat, I'd say.
At least. Yeah, that comes up all the time, doesn't it? And all the points that we're talking to today, you know, this conversation was not scripted, you know, but the same points come up again and again and again, you know, whether it's, you know, estate agents and knowledge within the industry, which is most definitely reduced, whether it's indemnity insurance, you know, what our role is, the same topics come up again and again and again. And that's why, you know, I do worry about the sort of educational process that's out there for clients to look at, because for me, you know, trying to tell clients what's what, is very difficult when, of course, you might have an estate agent or a mortgage broker, or even the banks direct telling the client something completely different. You know, on the Thursday last week, on that stamp duty deadline, I still had banks telling clients, oh, you know, it's only the certificate of title that's awaited before we can release the money. Right, okay. But you failed to actually, you know, ask what position we were in. We don't have searches. We don't have answers to inquiries. You know, we're buying a leasehold property, we don't even have the management company back. But yet the client's then moaning at me because it's only a certificate of title that's awaited. You know, what can you say?
Well, it's about communicating with the clients. They need to understand the situation. It's a very alien process. And I always tell them, look, if you have a stupid question, ask it, because that's literally what I'm here for. I'm here to advise you. I'm not here to do this transaction. I get paid regardless of you buy this property or not. If I tell you not to buy it, I charge you for my time. I charge you for my advice, which is why I say, well, look, the estate agent, they want their commission. They want it done. The bank, they want their interest payments. They have a vested interest. Me, I don't care if you buy this place or not. I want you to have a nice home and everything else. But if it is not in your interest to buy this place, I've got no financial stake in this. I get paid regardless. So I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm going to tell you, don't buy this place. And I have done that a few times, and I don't like doing it because I feel like I failed. I feel like I can't figure a way of untying this knot. And
that's a really interesting point, Charlie. Sorry to cut across you, but for absolutely years, and just for the, you know, the benefit of our viewers, the way I met Charlie actually was on a CPD course, and I realised very quickly that actually, Charlie, you knew as much as I did, but that was fine because you were lovely and contributed marvelously. Some people don't, but that's, you know, one of the things that I spent years in practice thinking the very thing. I must be able to put this problem right. You know, I'm failing as a property lawyer if I'm not putting this problem right. And actually, it was a bit of an epiphany, and I think it happened gradually, where I realised I can't put it all right. And sometimes the best thing you can do and say, which is relatively rare, but is, don't buy it. But what are the sort of circumstances, Charlie? What for you are the sort of showstoppers? Give us a couple of examples of where you have advised the client to withdraw.
Well, there was one where, and this was, again, it was a standard lease. It's a standard lease. Client, cash, wanted to invest in property, buy to let, because she saw it. And that's a very common thing. Cheap money at the moment, rent's going up, inflation's high. She thought, yeah, I'm going to sink my money into this new property. I went, okay, fine. It's a flat. I went through it. First thing I saw, lease. Looked at it, first thing, 2 seconds, too short. She's cash, she could buy it. For the people who don't know, leases basically are contracts. They run for however long they run for. Once you get below 80, banks start getting very wary about them because they're becoming very expensive to extend them, which may change in the future. I'm obviously acutely aware of this because I specialize in leasehold property, but also I've got a massive, very impressive landlord and tenant team in my firm, and we do all the complicated stuff. And I looked at it and I went to the other side and I said, right, well, look, we can't buy this now because yes, we're cash, but I have to advise my client in the future how easy is it to sell, sunk costs, everything else like that. I said, right, well, we want you to extend the lease. Go to the landlord, get a price, extend the lease, end of the matter. And she said, okay, absolutely fine. As a bit of context, also the stamp duty is sort of ticking in the background. This is the upper limit of the client's budget. If it gets past the stamp duty, she can't buy it. So we're going through all this, and the estate agent keeps saying, oh, it's going to be fine. It'll be fine. Don't worry, we'll get you the lease extension. Absolutely fine. I've got some firm I've never dealt with previously. Hopefully won't ever again. And they kept saying, oh, don't worry, the lease extension's coming. It's all been agreed. The lease extension's coming. And I'm like, all right, that's great. Let's see the papers. And they send me over this 2-page document. And I'm like, that's a very short lease extension. Let's have a read of it. Section 42 notice.
Oh, really?
Right. And I go to them saying, sorry, you haven't agreed the lease extension. No. You haven't talked to the landlord at all. No. You're going to serve the statutory notice, give it to my client, and then she's going to pay for everything, which she can't afford. Yeah, that's fine.
Did she take your advice though, Charlie? Did she walk away?
No, she didn't, Lorraine. She ran. She ran as fast as she could. And here's the funny thing. She then bought in the same block with a different estate agent, and that agent got the commission because the agent knew what she was looking for, knew the industry, knew the process, and said, look, there are a few things in this sort of area. I know what you're looking for. This is the one you want. The first estate agent had no idea. He just thought, oh, it's fine. It's fine. Because all he could see was the end result, commission, blinders on.
Well, there we go.
Yeah.
You know, Charlie, before we came on air, you gave, do you need a bit of a drink there, Stu?
Right, excuse me.
Mate.
Can you get COVID via Zoom? Shall I be concerned? Shall I get the mask?
Hope not.
No.
No, it's Stu, do you want to confess to Charlie why you're spluttering, mate?
Oh,
Do you
I
want to
can't
tell
possibly.
Charlie? Not on.
I've no idea. I don't know. Might be the 10 pints I had at the weekend.
It might be across the whole.
Oh dear, I don't know.
Oh, Stuart. Oh no.
Yeah, what's going on?
Charlie, before we came on air, you said we were talking about how simple conveyancing is. So give us your list, Charlie. You're a simple property boy. You're a simple conveyancer. So give us an idea of perhaps the couple of things, the couple of tasks that you're capable of dealing with that all us simple conveyancers would have to deal with.
As a very very astute family judge once said, conveyancing, it is a crude, mechanistic, form-filling exercise requiring no legal expertise whatsoever. I always remember that when these things come up. Just by a weird coincidence of me being relatively junior in the profession, I've been doing it for 8 years. I'm 4 years qualified yesterday. Hooray. But as a consequence, I take the weird things. I could tell you about the time I had to go to prison to meet a client to get signed up. I could tell you about the time that the seller died after we exchanged as my client was trying to move in. I could tell you.
We always try not to. Always try to. That's the sort of stuff. That's the stuff of lectures, mate.
I could tell you about the time where someone had exchanged contracts. The law firm they had instructed was intervened in by the SRA, and then I had 5 days to complete a £3.7 million purchase. So, but the one I always remember is what I call the Hammer House. Strap in. This one was acting for my loveliest clients in the world. I've acted for 3 generations of their family, and they've said, right, we've sold our portfolio. We now want to buy our our family home, the big home. And it was a bit bittersweet because I knew I wouldn't be acting for them again because this is their final home. They found this lovely house in Essex or Kent, somewhere in that sort of area. And, you know, big purchase price. And they said, right, let's do it. We're going through the whole process. Now, my client, former senior director of one of the bigger companies, very switched on chap. And he knew, well, we know why he's selling because, you know, the sellers are currently divorcing. And that's why we've gotten such a good deal in it. They need to sell quickly. And I'm like, okay, great, you know, sort of going around. And clearly the seller wasn't taking the divorce well, which was kind of summarized very quickly because we sort of knew something was going on because my client, in his own recognizance, had done some background checks and found all these HMRC cases against his various companies for unpaid VAT and this, that, you know, lots of, you know, sort of civil things. You think, oh, you know, crap businessman goes down, sort of thing I grew up with in Surrey. You know, smoke and mirrors marriage sort of thing. You've got all the expense, you know, you earn £5 a month, you spend £6 on expenses. That's why it's all collapsed around him. And clearly he wasn't handling it very well because when my clients went to go see the estate agent to pick the keys up to the final check before we were ready to do everything, he turned up about 10 o'clock in the morning in a white panel van, screeched up, came out of the van, drunk as a skunk, completely and utterly swaying back and forth with a hammer, big claw hammer, and proceeded to smash up the estate agents because obviously he didn't want to sell. So obviously that sort of, you know, obviously he gets carted off and everything else. As an aside, one of my clients happened at the time to be a magistrate. So that didn't go down terribly well. And obviously this is being recounted to me on the phone. And they say, so obviously, Charlie, we will not be proceeding. And I went, no, absolutely fine, absolutely fine. So that went away and I had to phone the other side and tell them, oh, by the way, did you know this happened? They went, no. And I went, well, we're returning papers, obvious reasons. Bye. Cut to 2 weeks later, the client phones up and said, Charlie, we're buying the house again. I went, what, the Hammer House with Mr. Smashy? And he went, yes, we're buying off Mr. Smashy. I went, why? Because we've gotten to reduce it even further because no other agent will touch him. And I went, okay, solid.
Yeah.
But then he said, but then he said, right, but something doesn't smell right. And I said, well, what about the court cases, all the money stuff? I mean, that doesn't smell right to me. And he went, no, it doesn't smell right to me too. Can we speed this up? Can we get it done before the end of business tomorrow? And I went, I'm sort of doing calculations in your head thinking, well, we can do that, we can do that, we can cover that. We don't need that search. We can, you know, and trying to find ways of, you know, bridging it. And I sort of went, okay, yeah, we can get it done. Got it all done very quickly. The sellers were happy because they got their cash. They got to go off in the sunset, their own separate ways. And my clients are very happy. They got their family home. They proceeded to start kitting it out. You would think that would be the end of the story. About 2 weeks later, I get a phone call from my receptionist. Mr. Davidson, the police are on the phone. Oh God, what have I done now? So I pick the phone up and it's PC Plod. Well, actually, no, it's Detective Constable Plod. He's from the Serious Fraud Office attached to HMRC. And he goes to me and he says, Mr. Davidson, I understand that you act on Mr. X, Y, and Z for the purchase of address Y. And I'm like, well, I can't confirm or deny anything about my clients. I'm terribly sorry. You know, solicitor, I can't, you know, sorry. Well, I have a writ. And I went, well, in my head, I'm thinking, well, that's dated you quite badly. And he goes on in some very sort of condescending sort of way to say he's got a court order which freezes the assets of the sellers I've been dealing with. Turns out those cases are a lot more serious. It actually, it was not just him not paying taxes, he'd been doing all sorts of naughtiness. And he said, and obviously I'm terribly sorry, it means your clients are going to have to move out of that house because they don't own it. And all of a sudden I'm panicking because this is not the sort of thing you can check for. There's no record of criminal freezing injunctions. So I say, well, I'm trying to keep my voice from panicking and trying to keep it calm. Well, obviously I can't confirm or deny anything, but if you could please send me your writ, I'll have a look at it. Thank you. And he sends me over and I'm reading through it. And yeah, I mean, I have a brief stint in criminal law when I was much younger and I recognize it. It's a asset freezing injunction from the Crown Court, very serious stuff. It's under process of crime, that sort of thing, all this other stuff. And all of a sudden, I'm going through it and all of a sudden all the things are going through my head, money laundering, clients moving out, all the thing. Then I noticed the date of the order. It was dated about 2 days ago, i.e. over 2 weeks since we bought the property and got it registered. Order isn't retrospective. So I'm thinking, right, we can't be touched then because the order froze the assets, not assets at the time of the order was made. So the money that the sellers have, not the house, the client is fine. I have to phone up my lovely clients and explain to them, which is not a standard phone call. Hopefully I'll never have to make it again. Explain the situation, give it to them. They said, okay, fine. And they said, I knew something was wrong. I went, well, there we go. I'm glad we got it done. That's all fine. In my head, I'm thinking if we moved at a regular speed, we would have been caught out by this. And he said, well, what should I tell the police officer? And they said, well, say thanks, but no thanks. Say, sorry, nothing to do with us. So I went back to the police officer and I sort of said, well, I'm terribly, thank you, officer. I've talked to my clients. I'm now authorized to disclose to you. We bought this property on this date. We registered on this date. Your order is dated this date. It has no teeth. I'm terribly sorry. However, I can tell you that the seller's conveyancer this is their address. I would recommend you approach them urgently. And like most real stories, it doesn't have a punchline. But in my head, the one thing I wanted to say to him, which I didn't say, was simply this. If you had been a little quicker, you would have stopped this quote unquote criminal from walking off with a large sum of cash. But yet somehow you had the right, you felt you could talk down to me. Oh, well, it's not your problem. It's your problem then, isn't it? So yeah, that was the hammer house, really.
Yeah, I mean, that's the weird thing, isn't it? Because, you got it done in sort of super quick time, Charlie. And it is that kind of condescension thing, isn't it? It's just so irritating and unnecessary. But it's fair to say, as you said, if that had been conveyancing at the normal pace, well, it wouldn't have happened, would it?
No, it would have been the standard, nice, relaxed thing. There weren't any rush or week between exchange and completion. So we would have been caught by this. Yeah. So I'm not, it's not saying, this is not to say that, oh, look at me, I'm an amazing lawyer. No, I mean, you just got to roll with the punches. There's no way I could have seen this coming. No one could have seen this coming.
No.
Yeah.
No. Stu, one of the things you said, just moving on, one of the things you were, before we came on air, that you and Charlie definitely agreed on was how last week felt at the end of the SDLT holiday. And this is probably a place to think about drawing a close to this chat. But what did you both say about how last week felt? Because I thought it was quite funny.
Kind of a bit like an anticlimax in a way, isn't it? For me, exactly the same as Charlie. You get to the end of Thursday, you think, oh, it's done. No more, completions. Great, can go and have a beer. Fantastic. And all of a sudden, hang on a minute, it's Thursday. I've actually got completions tomorrow and a substantial amount of them. So it's the realization that, all of a sudden, it kind of feels like when I was at school and, you broke up for the summer holidays. It kind of felt like after 30th, yeah, we're breaking up for a 2 month, a 2 month siesta, but no, unfortunately not. Back in the office, the crack of dawn the next day, loads of completions, same old thing, chasing banks for mortgage monies, blah, 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 blah. It's the realization that actually it all carries on again. Here we go again.
We were all waiting to use this overused hackneyed phrase. I think you were all waiting for the sunlit uplands, weren't you, on Friday, that never actually came. And Charlie, maybe just to conclude, the ridiculousness of the stamp duty holiday, as never was. Just tell us about the client who was just the client's, a wealthy client's view on a small stamp duty land tax saving.
I've got to be careful here, obviously, though, because if it was me, for all I know, I would have been saying the exact same thing. But I had a client. Well, there was a client, more accurate to say, though, who was purchasing a very large property. We're talking, high seven figures, cash. Not his first property either. And he was absolutely adamant it must be done before the stamp duty holiday was over to save the 12 grand. And in my head, it's a bad thing. I expressed that £12,000 as a percentage of the purchase price. And in my head, I was thinking, oh, will you just leave it, it's for whatever. But it's unusual how we get so desensitized to the numbers. It's not money to us, it's just numbers. But I just found it bewildering because everyone just wanted it done. And the one thing I will say, which is actually amusing, a very dear friend of mine was going to buy during the height of the stamp duty holiday. Negative advice, couldn't buy the place, walked around. He sat down and looked at the purchase prices of all the properties that had jumped up in that time. So he said, well, hang on, so I'm spending less on stamp duty, but I'm paying more for the asset. And then look at that as the higher borrowing rate over 25 years. Have I saved money? Has anyone saved money?
Well, we don't. We reckon not. This is something we touched on a couple of times, Stu, didn't we? We just thought that the, as you quite rightly say, Charlie, the increase in the price, the sellers thinking, let's make hay, would have just gobbled up any stamp duty land tax saving that the buyers were due to make. That strange sort of feeding frenzy, I think, has probably, not saved any buyers a bean.
There was one person who they were doing the classic thing. They were converting a flat to rental and buying their new family home, upper end of their borrowing, everything else. They exchanged the day the stamp duty holiday was announced, when I phoned up the client, she cried. She was so happy because they suddenly had extra 12 grand, which they needed because that was they had no savings left. And I think in the heady days when it all started, it was wonderful. It shows that it's the stamp duty tax, you know, it slows things down and everything else. But then towards the end of it, the market, as it always does, readjusted, you know, so it's an interesting story. And to the people who qualified during this time, and I've got a few very wonderful colleagues as paralegals and trainees who started during the pandemic, during the stamp duty holiday. I thought, trial by fire, amazing work. But let's never do this again, please. Thank you.
It'd be very interesting what the new normal will be. I wonder whether people's expectations, the level of speed that we've worked at, I wonder whether, you know, the new streamlined conveyancing process, I wonder what it will be like, you know, the next few months.
Well, we have this wonderful new streamlined process, and here's our new scale of fees in relation to the new scale. No,
I hope it's on the website, Charlie. I hope any new fees are absolutely out there on the website. Lovely. Well, it's been an absolute delight to talk to you. Well, I think it's fair to say we'll be inviting you back, Mr. Davidson.
You're very kind, thank you.
Really kind of you to join us. Thanks ever so much for coming. And well, hopefully we'll see you really soon.
Excellent.
Take care.
Take care, guys. See ya.
Bye.
See ya. Bye.